All right, guys. Thank you for being here. It's 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon. It's time for our live panel Q&A, and this discussion is uh, all about emissions. So we've got two of our speakers who talked about emissions this morning here to engage and answer questions. I've got several lined up, but I want to start with this one. And for the rest of you who are joining, please feel free to type questions into the chat, or Deshaun may be able to give you access to speak and ask your questions directly. So should we reduce emissions because it's morally the right thing to do, because financially it's going to make money, or because we're going to be up a creek if we don't?
That is a loaded question.
Yes, it is. Start off with a bomb.
Just start off with the heaviest question of them all. It's funny because we were talking really briefly before we started the session with Jim. Colorado School of Mines Payne Institute for Public Policy has been putting on a 2-day responsibly sourced gas symposium in Golden, and that very question was basically posed almost the exact same way, right? There comes some panelists that got up there, Chris Romer from Project Canary, and I think Julie Murphy from who's a director of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, got up and talked about all the positive things we've done with reducing our emissions and the impact that's had. And then the very first question they took was, well, yeah, but, right? We've seen, it hasn't traditionally been good for small producers, small business. That's why here in Colorado in particular, we've seen quite a bit of consolidation and M&A activity. I guess my answer is all of the above, right? I mean, yeah, we need to be doing it for the environment. Obviously, I think it's not something that seems to be challenged very much, even within the oil and gas community, that emissions from methane and CO2 are harmful to the environment, and we need to work hard at limiting how much we emit from our industry. I think there's a lot of positives, quality of life, environmental justice problems that solves. Can we make money off it? I think we can. The market doesn't seem to be there yet. Because we're still working through challenges with, measurement and reporting and verifying, the emissions from, along the hydrocarbon value chain. And, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I think for this industry to ultimately remain viable and help change the narrative and prove itself as whether you want to consider it natural gas in particular, a transitional fuel or a green energy, or you name it, in the energy mix, say in 20, 30 years, it's something we ultimately have to do whether we like it or not. I think we can debate the impacts and the true, if Saudi and Russia and other countries aren't following along, what is the ultimate what are we actually gaining from it? That's probably a separate conversation. But at the end of the day, from an optics perspective and a responsibility perspective, I think personally, it's something we have to do.
Yeah, I think it is too. I wrote an article about a year and a half ago called "The Moral Case for Venting." And there's just no good reason to do that. Tim, what are you thinking?
Well, I think the moral argument, as both of you have said, is pretty clear. There are very few deniers, I think, even throughout the industry, and obviously the rest of the political and kind of climate is definitely reached the goal of reducing emissions. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways, that's all you need. That's why you should be doing this. And I think the financial incentive, I think, is still a little unclear or yet to be developed, as Andrew kind of talked about. There are ideas, responsibly sourced gas premium contracts, carbon credits, carbon, trading schemes. But a lot of the incentive right now is the avoidance of pain, right? I have to do it to keep my permit. I have to do it to not get a penalty. I have to do it to not be faced with the new EPA methane tax that's coming down the pipeline. So, I mean, the moral case is clear. I think the financial case from a kind of defensive side is clear, because the regulations in almost every part of the United States, Canada, Europe are all, squeezing down on it. I think, one of the legitimate questions is, as Andrew kind of alluded to, if we clean up our act and nobody else does, will it make a difference? And I think that's the one that to make a difference needs the world to collaborate around what we're trying to do. Colorado is working really hard and has for a number of years to try and clean up methane emissions. It's got a no flare rule. It's got an awful lot of different ways of making sure operators are going by best practices. But the DJ Basin's not going to save the world. It's a small drop in a big ocean. It's worth doing, but it really has to be the precursor of a lot of other action by the industry throughout the whole world. And right now, some people are moving fast. Alberta, New Mexico. Colorado's not alone in trying to attract the subject. Some have gone, like California, to let's just ban the whole damn thing, right? That's, if your economy can sort that out and you still have energy security and energy affordability, maybe that's what choice they want to make. But I still think, the idea of a financial market-based incentive to do it is they still needs a lot of work. The market's still not is sending mixed signals. I'll say it that way, about this effort to the industry.
So I forget what the number is, the total billions of tons. So the hundreds or the thousands of billions of pounds of greenhouse gases that are emitted every year. And we want to drive that to a net zero. It's a big scale problem and a long way down to zero. But
I've described it as if you want to learn how to swim, you're going to have to learn how to swim in the deep end of the pool. Where we are right now is in the shallow end of the pool, and we've gotten used to estimating our emissions factors through the typical emissions factor formula with all of that, and we know how to do that. We are doing that. Some people have a much more complete inventory, facility, equipment, and process than others, but still we know how to do that. That's the challenge. When we go into measurement informed inventories or direct measurement is in itself, which right now we can't do at scale, but if we do that, we need to go into the deep end, and that's a big step, right? And you talked about the size of the reduction that has been is forecasted that needed to get to the targets. It is huge. It is a revolution. It's not incremental improvement.
The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, right? I'm glad we're starting.
No, that's a point. I mean, we have to be brave, and we have to take that step in where our heads above water in the pool, and we have to, learn how to swim.
Well, and fortunately, the way it works is with the climate, everything we don't emit has a benefit. To meet 1.5 is going to be a real stretch goal at this point, but everything we don't emit has a benefit. Tell me about consolidations. Andrew, you mentioned that a minute ago, the emissions regulations were driving some consolidation. Did I understand that right? And how does that actually work to reduce emissions?
It's a great question. Look, thinking about that question with like a Colorado-centric perspective, we've seen tremendous consolidation in the state. I swear in 5 years, there's going to be 3 producers, right? Oxy, Chevron, and some conglomerate of Civitas PDC all smashed together, right? Because we've seen, these companies kind of fold in on themselves in part because, the regulatory climate it's expensive, it's difficult to operate in. I think there's strength in numbers, and, producers are getting savvy, and they're specializing in basins. They're trying to have, I think, a little less geographic focus. And, the operators that operate in Colorado now seem to really know how to do it effectively, right? They know how to navigate the complex regulatory environment that the state mandates for them to produce. It is the bluest, outside of California, I would argue the bluest state that we produce oil and gas in here in the US. And so the producers are very savvy. Is that a benefit to emissions? I don't know. I like to coin the term emissions hot potato, and a few examples I'll give you. Shell, 2021, Royal Dutch Shell lost a court battle over basically being forced by the Dutch government to cut their emissions in half by 2030. So what do? Well, they turn around and they say they know that they can't do that realistically without divesting assets, right? So they basically, instead of truly getting it out of the atmosphere, they just got it off their books, right? I think you could argue probably the same thing of BP selling their assets to Hillcorp in Alaska, right? They're just playing this game of emissions hot potato to get the carbon off their books and make it look like they've been proactive in meeting these goals that they're being set. But ultimately, the net effect on the atmosphere, I think you could probably argue, is actually worse, because you're going to turn these assets over in theory to operators, and this is no knock on Hillcorp in Alaska, but to operators that don't have as deep of pockets and resources to operate those assets in the same manner. And so is it good for emissions progress? I think you could probably debate those merits.
Yeah, that's a good question. Good observation. Jim, what do you think?
Well, clearly the consolidation that Andrew talked about has taken place. And I don't know if the number is 3 or 4, but it's a smaller number that are maybe left standing in 2030. All of this stuff makes it harder on small to mid-sized producers. And there's been a lot of, and I just the Colorado story. I mean, there's other basins outside of the DJ Basin in Colorado, which really represent a different world. The West, the Piceance Basin, Uinta Basin, Douglas Creek Arch, that sits over on the western slope, is really dominated by these smaller sort of players. The regulatory attention, the spotlight hasn't really been on them as much as it has been in the DJ Basin because of the urban and suburban, kind of community pressures that sit just north of Denver. But the new rulemaking, so now are, they cover everybody, and there's no operator in any part of the state or any part of the United States or any part of Canada that's going to get away with hiding. And compliance is getting tougher, and measurement costs money. And so there's a real question: what's the value of those investments? Is it staying in business? Maybe compliance is all that's needed to drive us into the deep end of the pool. But there are companies that are just barely making it, and I don't know if they survive. There are companies in the middle that are going to have to spend some to improve their operations, kind of performance. One of the conversations I had yesterday in a state meeting is one of the big variables is operation performance, because there are some that are, OGCI 0.1% methane intensity, and are already kind of there, and some by greenwashing their portfolio, as Andrew kind of talked about. But if you read the recent news about BP, they're slowing down their commitment to selling off their oil and gas portfolio because it's lowering the return to their stakeholders, right? So unfortunately, this oil and gas business is, when the prices are high, is pretty damn profitable, and that drives the return for the stakeholders who want money from their investment, not
Sure.
not just the ESG contribution. So it is
It's gonna-
complicated. And I think to Andrew's point, and I would agree, I think is all of this stuff that the industry is doing, and some of it's very good, is all of it making a net impact on the industry's emissions to the rest of that. And I think that's unclear.
Well, I think you're right. There's a lot of uncertainty around regulations, and a lot of it's changing, but we're just beginning to figure things out. And it's going to be chaotic and sideways. Colorado is, as far as I can tell, out in front on emissions, even in front of California, but on plugging also even in front of California. As I understand it, the industry in the oil and gas industry in Colorado participated in the writing of the new emissions rules. Did I understand that correctly? And how did that work out?
I just talked to a contact I have at the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, and she was saying she is currently participating in the 25th rulemaking in the last 5 years. So
Wow.
yes, the industry is participating. In some cases, like a rule a couple of years ago about improving wellbore stability and the rest of that, the industry was a major influence in how the regulations got played. The processes are transparent and they are open, and the industry, if it wants to, can play, and it usually wants to in some version or the other. But it really, the industry isn't one voice, and I think that's one of the things that's showing up here. And even it isn't just big. Civitas is a company, put together by merger of 3 or 4 mid-sized ones, and they have a very high environmental brand that it wants to try to produce, and they're in the middle of a lot of this community pressure. So it isn't all just Chevron and Occidental. It isn't all just Shell and BP selling their portfolios. It is really a complicated mix of a lot of companies doing a lot of things that they think are good for them.
Yeah.
And in a way, I mean, I do think Andrew has a point that if you sell off, if a big operator buys properties, it can raise the game. If a big player sells properties to smaller players, it might lower the game unless the regulatory pressure is on everybody. But still, I mean, in the same voice as we talk about Chevron and Occidental and Civitas and PDC in Colorado, there are other operators who are almost getting sued to go out of business because they are not in compliance, and they remain out of compliance for a long period of time. So there's one right now that has 1,100 wells, and if they go bankrupt, that's 1,100 wells that multiplies Colorado's ocean well program by a factor of 4. So I mean, there are consequences of pushing the smaller operators out. If you do that, where does responsibility go? It goes back on the taxpayer, the state regulator.
Yeah, I really want to follow up with several things you said there, but one of the bigger question I want to ask Andrew about is the different voices in the industry. But on the limited question there, though, Jim, I see a bunch of these operators who are just on the edge, and I agree that regulation risks putting them out of business and switching it over to public liability. What's the probability that it does not end up within a handful of years as public liability anyway? So in the case of this company with 1,100 wells, what's the probability that they're going to plug their 1,100 wells if they stay in business?
Probably not. I mean, I don't, the way that I mean, this isn't just in the lately conversation in the news. It's been going on for several years. And I think the state commission is just really fed up right now. It is getting ready to pull the plug on them. So, I think it's a problem. And of course, right now, with the infrastructure fund, the the fund to plug the wells in any state. The state has any state has access to a lot of money to get into the program. I think one of the things in again a Colorado story, but I think it'll be a New Mexico story and Alberta story and the rest of it, is that a lot of the operators who can consolidate smaller leaseholds and develop their program in what they call comprehensive area plan in Colorado, the CAP plan. If they can do that, they actually end up, and this is COGO statistics, they end up plugging more wells than they drill. And then Colorado's been doing that for quite a while now, because the major operators, it'll be part of their permit. They have to reduce emissions. So one of the contributions to that cutting emissions is plugging and refurbishing reclaiming the old well site. And they're doing lots of that. I mean, there's several thousand wells a year getting plugged like that. And because it's really part of the permit process to redevelop. And when you redevelop, you can redevelop a much lower emissions footprint. Not everybody can do that. I mean, it's hard to put a big leasehold together when you start with a checkerboard of smaller leaseholds all over the place. So when you can do that, it's a win. But a lot of people can't do that, and then they're left with wells that continue to get lower in production, become stripper, and then there's another story that this guy had, a couple dozen wells, but he lived off the oil revenue, and he had, because it's DJ Basin's an oil play with associated gas, but if he couldn't get rid of the gas, he couldn't produce the oil. And an old transmission line operated by a bigger player was shut down due to kind of age and maintenance costs and environmental. It was a leaky old gathering system. And when he shut it down, he didn't have any place to put his gas. So he was driven into bankruptcy. And he donated, quote unquote, all of those wells to the public orphan well program to take care of, because he didn't have any money at the end of the day to do that. Now the state has surety funds, it has fees, it has this infrastructure funding. So most of the states have a more active program than they did several years ago. There are other agencies like the Well Done Agency, like the Legacy Foundation in Oklahoma. Well Done's is out of Montana, working in Pennsylvania, that are really helping to identify and find these wells. There are lists of tens of thousands of wells that need to be plugged. The problem is there's probably much more than that we don't even know about. And if you go back into the older basins in Appalachia and even California, where they paved over them and put a parking lot on top of the abandoned well, there's a lot we still don't know on that abandoned well.
Just in the last 5 weeks, there have been workshops at both the Society of Petroleum Engineers and the AAPG, all about orphan wells. And I heard Well Done Foundation talking last week about it, doing some great work. But Andrew, for those of the listening to the recording who don't know, would you tell us just briefly as an introduction about the initiative you're working on at the Gas Processors Association, and then explain from the platform, the team that you're leading there, what do you see in terms of different voices in the oil and gas space?
So the work effort that we've started at GPA it's been interesting, right? So it was in its inception this time last year. Now it's matured, and wow, do people have opinions on this topic? Really the goal for me was to put the group together to start defining some of these terms, in this space of responsibly sourced, certified, and differentiated natural gas, right? I mean, you kind of hear it. Sometimes people kind of use those terms interchangeably. I think most people who know would argue that they're different. And so really we have come together to initiate a group within the GPA emissions committee to try to provide some standardization, right? Like, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and create a new standard. We're not trying to step on, the GTI's or the Highwoods toes or MIQ's toes. We merely want to just bring, some consistency to the conversations, and some alignment on terminology as these products, continue to emerge and become commercially viable. And so we've got a whole group. I mean, obviously service companies are interested, producers, midstreamers, the certification bodies have sent people to the meetings, MIQ, policymakers, right? There is a very broad interest in this topic and having a say and knowing what people are thinking. So we have seen, I mean, literally outside of maybe bankers, I would say we've had everyone participating in the group.
That's excellent. And you said people have strong opinions. Are they uniform?
No, they're not. And that's fine, right? I mean, I think, people have, tend to get into groups like that. People have certain interests they want to protect or advocate. And so certainly the conversation has been colorful and the progress not as quick as we would have liked. But I mean, that's just comes with the territory on these things, right? I mean, everyone, I have different opinions than a lot of other people. And there's people have been thinking about this a lot longer than me that have different opinions. And so, but that's the beauty of the group and really the purpose why I think input from all sides is a critical part of what we're doing.
I found in a lot of places, no matter how smart I am, I can't think of it all. And it does benefit from multiple voices.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see which one emerges, right? Because I think there's two kind of like dominant concepts you see in the space
Please.
of responsibly sourced gas, right? And that is, do you have responsibly sourced gas, which I think is more of the ESG route, right? So yeah, we're looking at methane, we're looking at emissions, but we're also considering the S and Gs. I think water, produced water will be part of that profile, right? And just the overall, social and governance practices of an organization in addition to that. So I think the responsibly sourced gas term really encompasses that versus like a certified natural gas program where really the emphasis is on methane and measurement and what is your methane intensity of your cargo along the value chain. It'll be interesting to see which one ultimately prevails and becomes mainstream, because I think they're both competing still in that space.
That's an interesting idea, and I do appreciate what you're saying about produced water. And there's more to our operations than just fugitive emissions.
We're going to tackle, I mean, for me and my company in particular, I think, produced water is a huge topic. I would almost argue, and I know this isn't a session on water, but I'd almost argue that water long-term may be more important than air.
Just unpack that for me for just a minute. I know it is a detour, but let's do it.
Well, I mean, you think about drought, you think about water scarcity in the West in particular, places like North Dakota, the western slope of Colorado, West Texas, New Mexico. We've got we've got the earthquake issue that we have to consider with putting water back down hole. And so API, the American Petroleum Institute, has a working group actively right now looking at standards for produced water management, right? And I think you're going to see that technologies for recycling produced water and looking at produced water emissions, right? I mean, there's, we think a lot about storage tanks for condensate and crude. We don't probably think about water tanks, produced water tanks just as much, but they're a huge source of emissions. And so I think you're going to see that topic really become paramount in the next 5 to 10 years.
Interesting. Well, back to Jim's point, it's better to design from the beginning for what's coming. Jim, is there something else? You were said in your presentation this morning that one of the best things you can do is design from scratch for all these issues during life and end of life. It sounds like plugging is part of the larger scale development planning that people are taking into consideration. Emissions need to be, what do you think? Water is going to add to the list? Is there anything else going to add to that list?
Well, there is one along, it may be just particularly a Colorado Front Range sort of problem, but ozone. The emissions of volatile organic compounds and of NOx elements that are also come from industrial sites. Oil and gas is an industrial site, is a major issue in some areas. I mean, Los Angeles obviously has dealt with this problem over decades, but the Colorado Front Range is, the EPA has recently deemed this state, these areas, you said 9 counties, I think, as way out of
Compliance?
planning, what the permit is, what the safety limit is. And so therefore we're going to have to tackle that. So clearly water, I mean, I echo Andrew's point about that. I mean, to me, it's a whole environmental footprint. And I would include, I mean, if you're talking about on the climate side, you have to talk about methane and then CO2. On the ozone with air quality side, not really a climate issue, but an air quality side, but it has one that has very significant impact on public health. You have the VOCs and the NOx and maybe even SOx, you know, kind of things with regard to that. You also, the size of the impact of the facility. I mean, obviously extended reach drilling and these super pads, you know, kind of models really reduce the amount of land that's disturbed, quote unquote, in order to do the production, you know, sort of facilities. And I think even that idea of the size of the land we impact, I mean, it's going to be one of the things that may differentiate remaining oil and gas from maybe some of the renewables, is that maybe we can impact in a much more compact, you know, kind of land use sort of issue. I mean, a solar farm doesn't emit greenhouse gas emissions, but it takes a whole lot of land because the energy intensity factor is much lower.
Right.
And you're starting to get a lot of people pushback in Ohio about wind farms, you know, and other sort of places that they're saying that we're starting to get a whiff of or not in my backyard,
Yeah.
you know, kind of an impact, a pushback by conservationists against the air quality, the climate, you know, people pushing for renewables. And it isn't an issue of oil and gas at all, but it's still one that can delay permits and can, I mean, there's regulations in some counties now that says you can't put up a wind farm. So you've got, I mean, there's always going to be an argument. As Andrew said, you get 5 people in a room, you come up with 6 opinions.
Well, and I appreciate
and
you saying that.
nobody agrees to start with, but we have to agree to talk.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And I love the differentiation you made between conservationists and environmentalists. And it only makes sense that in the same way that there are different voices in the oil and gas industry that have different emphases, you'll see the same thing on the other side of the spectrum where people are more interested in preservation. There's still a variety of voices and perspectives.
There's citizen pushback in our organization against new lithium mines. And, you know, we look at the critical mineral side of the renewables, and God knows we need lithium, right? It's the sources of the rest of it. Yet where we find lithium, sometimes somebody else has got a higher purpose for it.
Yeah. So I want to create a new term. I want to create the term YIMBYism. Yes, in my backyard. If it's low carbon, I don't care what it is. You can put it in my backyard. I'll take it. Power plants, I'll take it. Lithium mines, I'll take it. You know, low emissions oil and gas, I'll take it.
That would be a really good progress, because I mean, in the DJ Basin, there's a kind of an interesting cultural, political kind of area between 2 counties. I mean, Colorado is one that gives a lot of jurisdiction all the way down to county and city kind of levels for a lot of these permitting sort of issues. And you know, there's a part in the southern DJ Basin called the Wattenberg Fields, most productive part of Niobrara and any other formations there. kind of higher geothermal gradient, which matured the rocks a little bit better. And so clearly the geology there is favorable. The geology goes between the southern end of a county called Weld County and into Boulder County. In Boulder County, they have decided that they don't want it. NIMBYism. They're very much California style politics. And but the Weld County people, who is much more agricultural, much more well, not urban, not suburban, kind of a range of things. There's a few of those, but so Weld County is very pro. They're YIMBYs, right? And Boulder are NIMBYs. But the rocks don't change. I mean, the geology is the same.
Yeah.
And yet then they share a county boundary. So on one side there's nothing, and the other side there's a whole lot. And even now there's an issue of, well, what happens if I have my surface facility in Weld County and I can drill underneath the county boundary and I can produce my lease in Boulder County, right? That's now
Who regulates it?
And so it gets crazy at times. I mean, and I'm not trying to blame anybody or side with anybody with regard to that stuff, but it is how you look at it.
Well, the political disconnect between those two counties is incredible, right? I mean, 75% Republican in Weld. Yeah, it's totally
They live
different.
on different planets.
Yeah. Well, let me open up the discussion also to the people listening in live. If you guys have any questions, love to submit them under chat or just ask. But let me welcome at this point, Doug McMaster. Thank you for your presentation this morning. Doug is helping oil and gas companies to operationalize their emission strategies by helping them bake it into their cash flow analysis. Is that right, Doug? Are you seeing seeing uptake, demand for this kind of thing?
Certainly. Yeah, I think it goes into some of the early things. If you can design it from the beginning, you can take it into account, right? And you can, it's much easier. I like to phrase it this way: development decisions are carbon decisions. So you're already making decisions on, drilling, completions, facilities, when you're in the design phase. This is about an incremental amount of information to take into consideration, and also an incremental amount of capital. So there certainly are some changes, but I think one of the challenges that I've observed kind of engaging with various companies at different sizes or different states in their journey for emissions reduction is that the planning workflow for what the development plans are for a 1 year or a 5 year plan are in a different set of hands than the ones that are doing the emissions reduction. And so having operationalized economics or emissions in economics is basically hijacking the existing decision-making workflow. So, if
that sounds bad, but it also sounds good.
Right, because you're trying to empower the people and educate them and upgrade their skill set to take into account things like emissions reductions in the same way that they already do their project economics. So, unless both workflows or both analysis or the same set of decision makers overlap, it'll take it's a harder journey to get there if they're not.
So back in the shale revolution, back in the day, our reserves and economics software did not have Fetkovich, type curves or Fetkovich style analysis built in. So it's 1980 technology that had never been incorporated. And as a result, people used the tool they had and made a bunch of very bad decisions. Fetkovich is not perfect for a shale, but it's a whole lot better. And I think the fact that we can put carbon into a cash flow analysis, like you create that tool, makes it possible to change decisions. And I think that's huge. Are people going to use it though?
I think it kind of depends. it goes back to like, what's going to force the change? It's either some driven through internally, because that's the type of operator that they want to be, or it's driven through regulation, or driven through investors. So maybe the covenants and your ability to get a loan will be, or to get insured will be severely impacted, and that'll be another way that it'll impact, and people will smarten up and start and getting things incorporated. So it really depends. I mean, different, as we all know.
Well, and it's a highly uncertain, highly volatile situation, right? There's not really any good way to know what's going to happen.
I think one interesting thing about what you're saying is it's Occidental. I mean, and their CEO
Yeah.
really kind of come out and said, we're now in the carbon management business, right? And so therefore you have to factor carbon into your economic investment decisions. And at the same time, you use some of your resources that have been producing carbon from the ground to put it back in. So investment in carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have some of these big companies that are talking differently. I mean, BP and Shell, obviously on one side. I think Oxy is going in another interesting sort of direction, at least what they're talking about. I think a lot of other companies are still debating, if they change their, kind of corporate strategy, or if they, how they're going to respond. There is a change in the environment, so they have to respond one way or another. And I think we're in progress. It's a work in progress.
Well, and there are a handful of companies like Oxy who are really leaning in. Last year for CarbonExpo, our theme was counterstream, and it was exactly that premise: upstream, midstream, downstream. All we're going to do is counterflow the carbon back to where it came from, and it makes perfect sense because the whole system is stuff that we're familiar with. So I'll ask.
And again, it's a technology that, I mean, there's a lot of other things we're going to have to learn how to do. Doug's point about teaching people, educating people. The carbon storage is an issue we already know. I mean, we already know the physics.
Yeah.
Disposal of wastewater. We know the physics. Unfortunately, we didn't use them in Oklahoma, and we didn't use them in some other places. So,
or Delaware Basin.
We broke some rock we didn't want to break. Induced seismicity problems.
Right.
So, some of it's learning new skills, some of it's relearning old skills, is your Vetkovich, kind of example. Some of it's just using it. I've seen this example of Civitas, because it's a relatively small company. The guy that made the facilities investment decision and the woman that made the air quality, kind of decisions knew each other. They were down the hall. It was easier for they all to be in one room when they made one of these larger collective decisions. Big companies sometimes, the air quality people are sitting in another campus, and from the facility people, from the production people, from the others, and that sometimes size gets in your way, bureaucracy gets in your way, and maybe some small companies can do some novel things.
Man, that would be great. So if people listening to the recording were going to want to stay up to speed on what is happening in the emissions world, and how the thinking is changing, who would they follow if they wanted to participate in helping to create change and new practices? Where would they get plugged in? Yeah, you go first because you've got the most immediate application.
Yeah, well, just because it's so fresh, right, from yesterday. Such an energizing talk that Fiji George from Cheniere delivered at Colorado School of Mines. So I forget his title, director, VP of sustainability at Cheniere. But, when you think about like, hey, who do you want to follow? And like, if you really want to kind of be in, Cheniere is the largest producer or purchaser rather of natural gas in the United States, 8 BCF a day. Ooh. And you know how much certified natural gas they purchase? Zero. They don't purchase any, right? And he said, we will not purchase it until we trust the MRV, the measurement, reporting, and verification, the science of it, right? And so they have spent $50 million now working with an academic consortium to really think through this idea of how do you take the quantification and the measurement and really synthesize that into, meaningful data, and how do we, essentially, how can we track a natural gas molecule from the wellhead to their plant and really believe that it was produced with a methane intensity of X, or it was produced in a certain manner. And so they are working on a program that they kind of teased yesterday, the EEMDL program that, a lot of what they're doing is going to be open source, so it's accessible for industry. There's no trade secrets there. But if you're really wanting to kind of get a pulse on measurement, reporting, and verification trends and technologies and who's really doing it, I would follow Cheniere.
Okay.
And
Super.
to join with that, because I agree with what Andrew's saying, this MDEL program is brand new, and it has three, I think, reputable universities working on it. University of Texas at Austin, Dr. Bell and Dr. Ravi Kumar, Colorado State University with their Energy Institute, Dr. Zimmerly, and the MetTech Center with regard to that, and Colorado School of Mines with some work that we've been doing around machine learning and models on methane emissions from continuous monitoring sites, as well as that. Those three universities have put together some collaborative resources to tackle the kind of supply chain QMRV, sort of challenges that in another way, some of the European utilities are now asking for that number too. And before they buy the LNG that U.S. producers will put together, they want to know that number, just like Cheniere wants to know that number.
Yeah.
Tell
me again the name, Jim, of that initiative.
Energy Emissions Modeling and Data Lab, MDL.
EEMDL.
Right.
Excellent.
And it's led by Dr. David Bell, University of Texas at Austin.
And Kumar. Okay, very good. I will check that out myself.
Brand
Doug,
new,
what do you think?
Just within the last month.
Well, and just within the last month. That's awesome. So much of what.
Although Cheniere had been working with some of those groups before that, it's just in the last month they all decided to hold hands and come at it as one.
Kumbaya, my lord. What do you think, Doug? Where are you watching and listening, and where would you think people would plug in?
Honestly, for me personally, I'm struggling to find out what are the best places to listen to. I think one of the things that I'm lucky to do is engage with actual operators and find out where they're at. And so, it's really more about helping them.
Oh, we lost you.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off what he was saying, because if I hadn't heard the Cheniere talk yesterday, and you had asked me this 24 hours later, I would have probably said I don't know
Who
either.
makes decisions? Like the question.
Hey, Deshaun, would you ping Doug and with a text message and tell him we can't hear him? I appreciate it. Oh, there he is. Doug, we just completely lost you. You're like in mid-sentence and you just disappeared.
I think the computer recognized that I was trying to baffle everyone, and so they tried to cut it off. I'd say, internal subject matter experts. A lot of these
Mhm.
organizations actually have the talent, and they're not engaging them or bringing them as part of the discussion.
Fascinating. It's, you know, and I think it's just a matter of identifying, focusing on it. Andrew, what were you going to say? The piggybacking off Doug?
Oh, no, I was gonna say my answer would have been totally different, and
Yeah.
I would have probably had a great answer 24 hours ago. But yeah, I mean, you know, maybe a question for this group just to pose back. You know, there's a lot of conferences around methane emissions, a lot of imposters, right? And so if someone had to pick one or two shows to go to try to stay up to date and really be kind of looped in, what shows have you guys been to that you've enjoyed on this topic?
It's a great question.
I'll give you one. The CH4 conference, which is
CH4.
co-sponsored by Colorado State University's Energy Institute and GTI. It's about in its 7th or 8th year.
Really?
Sometimes it's held in Chicago where GTI lives, and sometimes it's in Fort Collins at Colorado State University. That's one where I attended it this year, and I learned a whole lot. And there were a lot of very interesting people, from Thomas Fox at Highwood Emissions to you know, to a lot of the GTI you know, brain power, the CSU brain power were all there, and a lot of other kind of things. So that I put that on the list.
And, I'm trying to find a link for it. Is the CH4 Connections? Is that the one?
Yeah, I think so.
It was
Again,
in
it's-
October.
Probably this upcoming October, I think. I don't know what the 2023 schedule.
All right, I'll put this here and you can confirm if that's it. Andrew, were you going to say something else? Or somebody else?
Nope.
Okay. So I agree. I'm worried about there are some dedicated conferences. I worry about them. I tell you, there's a conference I'm going to at the end of this month. It's mainly for industrials. It's not so much about methane emissions, but for industrials, it's called Decarb Connect. And they have a solid program of people talking about decarbonization for large scale companies. And I think it's a great place also for anyone who was looking for a supply of carbon dioxide to sequester. And in fact, brief commercial here, we're collaborating with them a little bit. If you use a discount code of CarbonExpo, you'll get a 25% discount there. Is Jim, is this CH4 Connections conference, does it function like an industry consortium? Is there, or maybe the EEMDL, is there a space, a need for an industry consortium?
Well, I mean, there's, I guess, I mean, there have been academic consortiums now about methane and other emissions for a long time. It goes back to Stanford's, you know, kind of effort. That's now almost probably a decade old. So there's been a lot of industry or industry plus professional associations like GTI, you know, that are around, and they have conferences, and that's the way they communicate. I mean, Payne Institute is just now starting its responsible gas one. This is the first year, but it's intended to repeat annually. So there's, if when you talk about that, the academics tend to lead these things because we like to get together and talk about our papers. So there's a different driver there. The industry one, I mean, this, you know, I mean, I totally agree with Doug and Andrew that when you can dig down inside of a company's operations, there's a lot of the right kind of skill set, the right kind of thinking. And I've seen that in several companies that I've been fortunate to work with. However, I think the industry as a whole is still taking a conservative, defensive, let's keep quiet, we stick to our own knitting sort of area. So in the SPE, of course, that's one of the it's not the biggest conference in the world. The biggest oil conference in the world now is in Abu Dhabi. But the ATCE conference from the SBE, which is large, traditionally thousands of people, and it mostly dominated by the reservoir characterization wizards, but now has a growing group called Gaia for the sustainability technical function, and they're becoming more part of the agenda, like digital oil field was 10, 15 years ago. So in those of course, that's not an industry consortium, that's a professional society. There's more talk about this stuff there. Yeah. The API, it's got to, it's going to have their work. The state or oil and gas industry is going to have theirs, but they are still largely, I think, shy. I mean, to use a word, and the industry's always been that way. It's, we're too complicated. You can't understand what we're doing, so go away. We'll figure it out and do it. But I think that time is coming to an end. I think they have to be more open. They have to be more transparent. There are industry consortium groups, OGCI, the OGMP 2.0. That's a little bit more United Nations centric, but there are lots of them. But like in a sense, there's almost too many of them, right? To say, well, which one do you want to go to? Well, you go to the one that your company pays for the travel expenses. But
if there is one to watch this year, I'm curious what you guys think. The COP28 meeting. So the UN climate meetings this year typically make headlines as being anti-energy, are being held in Abu Dhabi this year in December. Yeah. Which is a very interesting place, and a lot of people have kind of knocked it. Obviously, there's one of the head of the state oil companies in Abu Dhabi is now the program, right? And yeah. But the UAE is like the #2 spender or investor of renewable energies in the world. Like they are incredibly savvy.
Yeah. It's also home to the International Renewable Energy Agency.
Yes. Yeah. It will be very interesting to see, because I think this is the year that energy finally comes front and center at these climate meetings. So it'll be that'll be an interesting one to watch.
I appreciate it. I think I'll probably take a first class jet over and attend myself. The private jet. I wish I would like to say give a shout out to Abhishek. I appreciate you being here. We're just at the very end. Appreciated your presentation this morning.
Thank you.
If any last words, where would you send people if they wanted to learn about or participate in ongoing discussion about emissions? Where would you send them?
I think I would send them to some of the leading climate tech events that are now ongoing. I've learned a lot, especially in Boston and Houston at Greentown Labs, one of the really cool climate tech ecosystems. And I mean, the kind of technologies people are working on are really interesting. And what I've also found is a lot of people are from the industry and they really know where the gaps are, and they've taken on some new initiative to plug in some of those gaps. And you see a lot of activity in the startup space, in the climate tech, and connecting to these various ecosystems has been quite interesting.
Well, I see a lot of innovation on a regular basis. I see new ideas like yours that are people bringing new ideas, new thinking that are going to be both economically viable and beneficial. I think Digital Wildcatters is doing a series called Energy Tech Night. Those look interesting as well. Guys, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for the content you gave us, the presentations you gave us this morning. Thank you for participating in this discussion. If there's anything I can do to help you guys, let me know. And I'll say to our audience in the recording that exhibit hall is open for about the next hour. We encourage you to check it out. All of these folks have have a booth there and some more information. And then if you happen to be around at 3 o'clock, we're going to start our happy hour. We are having a live breakout room, BYOB, hang out and chat. And maybe we can continue our discussion there, because I still want to hear from Doug whether or not he thinks we can get those subject matter experts into a consortium in a private room. Thanks,
think so.
guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Deshaun, you can shut us down.
Yes, sir.
All right. Is the recording still going on?